G'day everyone and welcome to On the Outer. I'm Gus and I'm here with my co-host Tom.
Thank you, Gus. How did you go this week? It was a big round of footy. Round one's always hot, fiery, and plenty going on. Lots of excitement. I thought it was a pretty good round of footy overall, to be honest. Doesn't matter whether it was round 1 or round 16.
Yeah, look, it was round 16. Yep. A classically known, really good round of football.
It's when the grounds get wet and we start seeing like 50 to 40 kind of games, and they're usually the shittiest rounds. Yeah, trying to draw that link. Yeah,
gotcha. I mean, I had an okay weekend, Tom. I don't really want to talk about my team that I support because that was probably the worst performance of the round. So we're going to focus on their opponent, who we think probably had the best performance of the round, in the Cats. Some big debuts. We're going to have a quick look at that, a bit of a discussion about what we think the best one was, and then we've got some segments, our classic ones that we always do every year. We're going to revisit an old classic and round up our reverse shine a light, Tom.
Excellent. And reminding everyone, of course, if you are listening to this on your podcast platform, why not give us a look on YouTube as well? We're there at YouTube On the Outer. You'll be able to find us. Hit that subscribe button. The more subscribers, the merrier. And we'll also be receiving your questions, comments, feedback at ontheouter1@gmail.com. So jump on there, send through some stuff to start the season. We're still in that very, very impressionable stage at the start of the year, so we're probably willing to take on things that we might say no to later in the year. We do tend to field a lot of requests as the season goes on around that round 16 mark. So I'd get in now if I were you.
The famous round 16. All right, let's kick it off, Tom. We're talking about the Cats. I think, well, as I said, the most impressive performance, I think, from out of all of the clubs. Of course, the opposing team, the Essendon Footy Club, was pretty insipid, so take from that what you will, but there was a noticeable shift in game style from Geelong. Gone was the chip mark, possessed the footy. They still did it a little bit, but most of it was very aggressive, very attacking. They went out the front of the square. Patrick Dangerfield was doing his, his thing that he did right at his heyday, which was run it out of the middle and bomb it long to Cameron and Hawkins, which was a very dangerous, looked incredibly dangerous before Cameron again went off injured, which is beginning to become a pattern, unfortunately, for Jezza. But yeah, I think the way that they played has made me kind of reconsider exactly where the Cats can kind of go this season. Now, we are still going to have to see what happens when they play a team. Maybe they get 15 or 20 points down. Do they go back to the style that we've seen in the past, and does that just fall apart because they don't have, the courage to go through with it? But on first glance, it's very impressive.
Yeah, it was, and that's a good point. Like, it was quite easy for Geelong from sort of the get-go in this game, so they didn't really have, they weren't really challenged and thrust back to the security blanket of their old chip game plan. They were able to try this out, and yeah, it looked good. And we did see them do it last year at times, but there were also these times in these kind of games where they were well on top. So I think it's very, very good start. I'm probably a bit like you. I think they were the team that I went away from the weekend most thinking, okay, they're probably a fair bit better than I thought they were going to be.
It was the biggest change, of perception, I suppose, was where it was. Yeah.
And I still thought they were going to be a good side, but I think that they could be definitely in contention again this year. I think that they're that level of quality. Particularly, we always talk about this assumption that Geelong are going to drop off sooner rather than later. It's been talking about it for about 4 or 5 years now, and a lot of it's predicated on the idea that guys like Dangerfield and Hawkins and Selwood are going to drop off and start to decline. But if those three, particularly Dangerfield and Hawkins, continue to play as well as they did on the weekend, then that's kind of a non-issue. Like, we're just assuming that's going to happen. If it doesn't happen, then of course they're going to be top 4.
I mean, Hawkins is going to win the Coleman if he keeps playing like he did on the weekend. He just And again, I mean, he was playing against James Stewart, who is a makeshift key defender, I think, still, even though he's done it for a year. Dangerfield could win the Brownlow if he keeps playing as well as he did, because he was incredible as well. And you're right in saying that, like, that's sort of the perspective we have. We're looking at you look at that Geelong team, and as we've said many times, like, they don't have that middle group of players that are going to come up and take over from Danger and Hawkins and et cetera, et cetera. It's really just Cameron and Cam Guthrie at this point. But does it matter if those guys are still elite players? Like, it will matter eventually, but it doesn't necessarily have to matter in 2022. So we are seeing again their awesome talents. I think Tom Stewart was just outstanding again, which he has just continued to be for pretty much ever since he walked into the AFL. Midfield mix was really good. They've got some clever small forwards now as well. I think Stengel was really good on debut for Geelong. Luke Dalhouse looks like he's fit again. He kicked the ball like 52 metres, which would be the longest kick he's done in probably 4 years.
Yep.
But they look dangerous.
I was going to mention a couple of players. Stengel was one of them. Like, you know, is he going to kick 4 goals, have 7 shots and 20 touches every week? No. And he did do most of his damage after halftime when the game was won. But he's quite clearly a high caliber AFL level player who's just had some growing up to do and some, you know, personal issues and stuff like that. And he finds himself at his 3rd club now, which is an unusual set of circumstances for such a talented player, but also a fairly low profile player. He was drafted from the rookie draft originally, played a bit of footy in Adelaide, but that just makes so much sense. And, you know, when you found out that Eddie Betts is assistant coach at the Cats and that Stengel is living with Eddie, having been a bit of a protege of his up in Adelaide, there's almost no doubt that he's going to be a good player.
Yeah, you're just going to Eddie will just fix him. And it's it'll be fine.
Yeah. So he's a gun, and that solves a bit of an issue that I think the Cats had with that coming forward position. And then Brandon Parfitt was the other one, and we've sort of teased us for a few years. He's been quite often in the team, but not necessarily given the big jobs. And he's had big games in the past, and then he's not quite backed it up week to week. But if he can, it looked like to my eye, he was sort of the main dude. Like, he was in there, Dangerfield and Guthrie as sort of the main 3 that were in the centre square for a lot of that game. And I think that's a good move. And I think that if he really does have a bit of a breakout year, that changes the whole conversation about the Cats.
Yeah, and as you say, he's been, I guess, somewhere between sputtering and threatening to break out for 3 years probably now. And it's a little bit like back in the day when they had Motlop, Guthrie and somebody else, and they could never get them to all play well in the same season. Like, they could never... Yeah. They had one... Like, they had a career year and then the next one would have one and then they get injured, sort of thing. And, yeah, if Parfitt can lift up and all those other guys are still healthy, then they're a really good team again. So... That's really annoying, but good on the Cats.
Well, one of the bright sparks, Gus, from this game from a Bombers point of view, or probably the only bright spark, was the performance of debutant Nick Martin, one of 4 first gamers this weekend, all from very different walks of life, I suppose, in a footballing sense anyway, who came in and were close to the best player on the ground. Martin at the Bombers, Rochelle at the Crows, with his 5 goals. Jack Hayes with a really good performance with some strong contested marks and a few goals for the Saints. And then Nick Dacos doing what I think we all expected us to do. But for the uninitiated out there, Gus, can you give us a bit of background on Nick Martin and sort of where he came from and how he ended up here? And did you see this coming?
I didn't see 27 and 5, no. Marto's from Perth. He was playing Waffle last season. Averaged like 21 touches and a goal a game in the Waffle. So was brought over to do the SSP for the Bombers along with a few other They brought in quite a few, including Ronnie Feiho Jr. and a couple of others. Dylan Clark was training with Essendon as well.
Yeah. Wanganeen was part of that, was he?
Tex Wanganeen was also part of that. Performed really well in the intra club. He kicked 4. I think at that point, mainly more because of just positional stuff, because like Essendon do have quite a few of those sort of mid-size forward flanker wing types. I think he was probably behind Wanganeen and Feiho until the intra club, where he kicked 4 goals and just looked really at home and really solid. Then he went and played against the Bulldogs and again played really well, and Feiho sort of didn't play that well, so Feiho and Dylan Clark were sent home or sent off or whatever. And then he had 17 touches in a half of football against St Kilda in the first game of the only game of the preseason. And again, I think he was probably outside the 22. Well, obviously, because he only played a half. Like, he wasn't in the starting 22 again in that St Kilda game. And he just basically forced his way, first of all, onto the list and then into the best 22. And I don't think he's going to be getting dropped this week,
wouldn't have
Tom.
thought so.
So, yeah, just he's also, like, getting some good content out of calling his mum every time he, like, gets a list spot or gets a debut. It's all sort of just popped into a row. So, some good content there.
I mean, this is AFL football easy? Like, the fact that this would happen once in round one to a guy like Martin, let alone 4 times. Like, we're not talking about some solid debuts here. We're talking about 4 players who were probably their club's best player on the night. You could probably argue a couple of other Collingwood players were in the mix there, but Dacos did exactly what we expected him to do, which was come in, get 30 possessions and just be absolutely at peace with the whole thing. Rochelle, just star quality stuff straight away, completely comfortable, not overawed in the slightest.
Nearly won the game pretty much off his own boot. Just about.
Yeah, nearly wins the game. And then there's Jack Hayes' character who, like, just, again, like Martin, just popped up out of the SSP. I think he joined the list about 3 weeks ago. And all of a sudden he's, like, storming them back into the game in the third quarter and kicking snap goals and taking grabs. Like, is AFL football easy, Gus?
When you were saying, when we were talking about the show, I could only think of the 3 debutants because I didn't even have Hayes in there because he's like 26 and just not. It just didn't occur to me to think about it that way. But, I mean, yeah, I guess so. Like, maybe we should go down and have a run, Tom.
Well, to tie this back to what we were saying last week, I think, or the week before about Tasmania, like, this is, if anything, is a good advertisement for the idea that
the 19 clubs is totally...
the 50 players who best players outside of the AFL are probably just as good as the 50 worst players inside the AFL, sort of thing. Like, it's much throw a blanket over the type situation.
Well, particularly Martin and Big Hayes, because those other 2, Dacos and Rochelle, like, they're high 18-year-old draft picks who I think a lot of people thought had star quality and star factor to come into the AFL. And as I said when we were talking about that Tasmanian thing, I don't think there's enough stars to have a 19 teams, but I don't think there's enough stars to have 12 or 10. You know, like, there's just not enough really, really awesome footy players out there. But Hayes and Martin have just come from basically nowhere. Like, they are just random dudes who have essentially been signed off the street. Like, and look, I don't think Nick Martin's necessarily going to be a star because I don't think he kicks, like, he had 27 and 5, which is a star numbers, but I'm not sure if he's going to be putting that up. And I don't know if Jack Hayes is going to be taking big clunk pack marks and, like, how gassed did he look halfway through the third after he just looked like he was about to die.
Stuff. Yeah. But he kept going.
He kept presenting, but he just, it was pretty funny. But that, as you say, like, that just shows if those 2 are not good enough to make the AFL as in the junior pathways. Like, clearly there's enough good footy players out there to make another 44-man list if you give him a few picks in the draft and it works out that way. Which also sort of says what the hell's happened to the Gold Coast Suns for the last decade. But anyway, that's another conversation. All right, Tom, the other trio of noobs that we're going to have a chat about are the three coaches. I suppose we'll couch it in the term of who you think did the best job. So Michael Voss, Craig McRae, Sam Mitchell, all debuting with a win as well, which is you probably don't see. I wouldn't imagine you see that very often at all, because normally a new coach is taking over teams that aren't very good. But what to you was the most impressive coaching performance out of the three of them?
Well, I think that for me the Collingwood thing was very interesting, because that's clearly a whole different thing. What Fly is doing compared to what Buckley did, and we know the issues that Collingwood have had with their game plan over the last 2 years in particular, and clearly he's come in with a whole new ethos, and it's very impressive the speed with which they've picked it up. I still think that they're going to be a bottom six side, Collingwood. I can't see them breaking that barrier, but I think they're going to win some games this year, and I was pretty impressed with the way they played, so that's a big tick. Michael Voss is a different scenario, isn't he? Because he's not taken over a lowly team. He's taken on an underperforming team who probably has a top 8 list, or a top 8 best 22 anyway. And I was pretty impressed with the stoppage work. That was something I was keeping a close eye on at the game on Thursday night, just because he's been a really successful stoppage coach at Port Adelaide, and that's clearly his strength. The way that Carlton were able to transform their midfield, their centre square performance from what it was last year, obviously bringing in 2 quality trade-in players helps a lot. And Matt Kennedy looks like he's taken the next step too. But the way they were able to close in on the ball up, so either the ruckman would win it, didn't really matter who, Cripps would shark it, or if he didn't, the rest of the Carlton midfield would just go and just suck in and completely suffocate the contest, which meant Richmond couldn't get the ball out. So I thought that was impressive. I thought that was a significant step. I thought we saw some stuff from Carlton that shows that they might have overcome one or two of their big issues, which was defensive stuff and was centre square stuff. So, yeah, it's a big test for them against the Dogs last night, but I think Voss would be pretty bloody pleased, to be honest. Yeah,
look, I think you're right. To me, I think the Voss thing was... I think McRae and Voss were probably on par with the impressiveness, just because of the transformation that they've made with their teams. I am, as you say, pretty interested to see how Carlton go against the Dogs, because once Dion Prestia went off, it was sort of pretty light on in the Richmond midfield, and they could get away with getting sucked in or pulling into the contest like that and just basically 50-50ing it. You're not going to be... And
Richmond too, they've never invested in clearance and centre square, even at their peak of their powers. So, yeah.
They've just never been... They've basically just been Dusty and Shy Bolton occasionally, and then that's pretty much been it.
Yeah.
Whereas they're going to have to balance their stoppage work a lot more against the Dogs, just because they are so good at reading the space off each other and then and moving away from the stoppage in a wave. Like, the Bont or McRae will just win the ball, or Libber or Dunkley or whatever, throw a handball 10 metres over their head straight to one of their teammates, and then off they go. So you're not going to be able to collapse in with 2 or 3 players against the Dogs. So it is going to have to be a better balance, but that in itself will be a really good way of seeing just how far they have come, because if they are able to, be flexible in the way that they're setting up at the stoppage on the basis of their opponent, that's the kind of one of the last steps at being a really good stoppage team, I think. So, yeah. And then Collingwood looked really good.
It's perfect, isn't it? They're playing the Bulldogs this week. Like, you couldn't... It really is. It's really going to be... a really good indication. What about Hawthorne? What did you make of them? The team itself was relatively similar, although having Gunston back was huge, but good for Sam Mitchell to get off on the right foot, and I think he won a few people over slowly.
Yeah, look, I think Hawthorne, I mean, as you say, Gunston's... It was funny watching the forward line with Gunston versus last year when they didn't have Gunston, like how much better Jack Gunston is than anyone else they have.
It really makes you realise,
how good he is and how much better he is than like Mitch Lewis and Jacob Kaczynski. And that's not a shade on those guys. It's just that he's awesome. I think they'd be really encouraged with Sick Dog's performance coming back from injury. Giath coming back from injury as well looked really good. They're actually hopeful of getting Will Day back this week, which is a bit earlier than I think most of us thought. A little bit similar, obviously in a different way, but a little bit similar to Geelong. It's sort of hard to get a read on teams that are playing North Melbourne because we don't know how good North are going to be, if they're good at all. So we do have to, I think, out of the three of them, probably, I mean, for all three, we're going to have to wait and see, but Hawthorne probably more than the other two, we're going to have to wait and see a little bit more. But yeah, I think that their midfield looked okay. I would have liked to have seen Wingard come up around the ball a bit more, probably more often, because as we sort of talked about in our preseason shows, he is one of the few dynamic players on their list. But look, they got the win, and I mean, Mitch Lewis played well. That's a big win for them, and they got their players through who they had to get through and had to get through on return. They got them all through without reoccurrences of injuries, so that's also a good win.
Yeah, Mitch Lewis looks like something might have clicked for him to me, and he seems like the kind of player who, having a big game like that in round one, will really be good for his confidence and be good for his season in general. So,
well, the fact that he's playing with Gunston as well, suddenly he no longer has the number one defender, which he pretty much looked at most of last year. Now he's got number two, and that's a big difference. That's a big difference.
Fantastic. All right. Well, exciting to see how those clubs back it up next week, Gus. But we are going to move on and hit one of our really, really, really beloved segments from the last couple of years. And there was a little bit of news at the start of this week which derailed the excitement around the footy season. So we thought we should touch on that through the prism of footy ethics. Footy ethics.
Okay, Tom. Now, of course, I think most people will be able to figure out what we're going to be talking about. As you mentioned, it was at the start of the week where Bevo Beveridge told Tom Morris that he was a gutter journalist and an embarrassment, and told him he wasn't welcome, and just generally had a big go at him and during the course of that confirmed that Tom Morris's story was accurate at the same time, which I thought, look, if you're going to be strategic about it, probably wasn't the best plan. The fact that Tom Morris was then proven to be a few of those things, those negative things, probably it didn't register at the time, but it does raise a few questions about the media's role, the coach's role with the media, or their relationship with the media. What the AFL kind of should have done with Luke Beveridge. He's been, I think, what basically happened was that he did a public apology and they gave $20,000, not him, the club gave $20,000 to a mental health charity, which, I mean, it's great that the charity gets that money, but I'm not sure if that's necessarily should have been the end of the sanctions.
Yeah, no idea why the club.
Why the club?
I understand that clubs often pay fines for players and stuff, but that Beveridge put them in the shit by doing that. Like this, bizarre.
And I mean, we'll talk about it. Let's just talk about it more, kind of in a more relaxed manner. But I think the first thing that kind of sprung up to me, aside from all the mental health stuff and how cooked it was that a man is sitting there attacking a younger man in public on a national, in a national media, on national television. I also sort of the arrogance of Luke Beveridge to like order him out of the room and tell him that he wasn't welcome and ask him. Luke Beveridge, he's not doing them a favour. I mean, people need to understand this, I think, as well. Like, Luke Beveridge isn't doing the media a favour by turning up to the post-game press conference. It's literally part of his contract. Like, he is an AFL coach. He's required by the AFL and his club to go to that press conference. And Tom Morris, did make that point when he told him to get out. He was like, this isn't essentially said, this isn't your press conference. This is an AFL press conference and I don't have to go anywhere. And the arrogance of Beveridge to act like that, I think we've seen, I mean, this is probably the worst case, but we have seen a little bit of this stuff cropping up with coaches in the last couple of years. And I really don't like it. I'm not a fan of, the sheer, like, bald-facedness of it and the attitude that it kind of suggests or underpins.
The most remarkable thing to me, what I got out of it watching it, was that after, 8 years as a coach, a couple of years as a footy manager, a couple of years as an assistant coach, and 12 years as a player, Luke Beveridge doesn't know what a journalist is. Like, the indignity that he felt at the fact that Tom Morris, a journalist, was upending his best laid plans with selection by pulling a Swifty with Lockie Hunter as a late withdrawal. He genuinely felt, and this came across in his spray, he genuinely felt as though Tom Morris should be working for his best interests.
Yeah. And the one where he's
How naive is that?
Yeah. The one where he's like, oh, you guys call the club, like, and give us a heads up that you're going to leak this story. It's like, why? Okay, maybe they do. I don't know if that actually happens, but like,
maybe with a big story.
This is selection.
Yeah.
It's not even that big of a deal. This is like, okay, Lockie Hunter's getting dropped. Like, Lockie Hunter didn't have that good of a year last year, had some fairly significant off-field issues. And, if he came out round one, Lockie Hunter's not in the team, I think we would be like, all right, that's surprising, but we'd all sort of also just be like, well, Bevo doing Bevo things.
Yeah, exactly. Mitch Wallace won their goal kicking in 2020 and was one of their best players that year, and he barely played last year.
I don't think he's
like, it's not that weird. Yeah. It was remarkable, his response, and the lack of understanding about the role of a journalist. Also, it's football journalism. It's not like he's being grilled on bloody insiders or anything. Like, it's just. The other thing was, like, this is a long bow to draw, and I'm not saying Luke Beveridge is a fascist, but like
oh my god, here we go.
Well, attacking the media.
Just get the cut thing out here, Lemons. We might be going into libel.
Attacking the media for basically just reporting what's happening to your detriment as an organisation. That's like a danger sign. That's the kind of thing that we see all the time in countries where it isn't stable, or it isn't politically stable, and it isn't politically safe to report news. And so that's clearly a much larger scale to what's happening here. But it's the same kind of concept. Is Luke Beveridge doesn't want the version of, or doesn't want anything other than his version of what's going on to be portrayed in the media. And so he hounds the journalists for doing their job as opposed to just giving his version of the truth or his version of the story. So I thought it was bullshit. And the other part of it is the dog whistle part. Like, Tom Morris got scorched by Beveridge on national television, but how many trolls on Twitter do you think saw that, licked their fingers and jumped onto the keyboard to absolutely berate Morris, given permission by a guy with a pretty high standing in the game and within Australian sport to do that because he'd sort of set the tone. So I thought the dog whistle part of it was pretty gross, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, we might as well now discuss the sort of second half of this.
Speaking of gross, yeah.
And we won't go into it in too much detail because I think it's been brought up and rehashed and warmed up again for most of the week. But of course, we know that Tom Morris has now been sacked from Fox Footy for the leaking of inappropriate videos, one of which was racist, homophobic, misogynist, and the other one was, well, I guess it wasn't racist. It was pretty much the rest of the things, though.
The other ones, yeah.
Yeah. Look, that continues the stuff that we kind of know exists in the AFL and sports industry writ large across the world, that there is a deep-seated issue of misogyny and patriarchal like bullshit that has meant that women either don't feel safe or don't want to be involved with sport. And Tom Morris's comments, well, they should have been a surprise, but I think for a lot of people, honestly, they weren't, because they looked at Tom Morris and they listened to Tom Morris and they knew where Tom Morris came from, and they said to themselves, this is not that shocking that he holds these kinds of views.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about this is that Tom Morris is who we thought he was, like he has a great public persona, like he's very affable on television and on the radio, but the whole kind of knock on him has always been that he's this private school, well-heeled, silver spoon dude who got this position and maybe is a bit of a boys club type character. And, you would like to believe that those kinds of people wouldn't necessarily get to the top of the tree. But look where he was. He was the chief football reporter and chief cricket reporter on Fox Sports in Australia. So he was at the top of the tree. So what are the standards at the very, very top of AFL sports media that someone who holds these views, we think that we kind of accept that people who maybe have a bit more of an alternative viewpoint or a more modern contemporary viewpoint on things just won't get jobs in the media. Maybe they get to work for ABC Sport, or maybe they do an amateur thing like us and it gets some level of success that way. But people who aren't from the mainstream and aren't from these kind of like institutions that Tom Morris is from very rarely get positions in mainstream football media, especially if they're not ex-players. And up until this point, there's just an acceptance. Like I've just kind of thought, oh, that's just the way it is, that's just what it is. But this kind of made me realize, like, why do we accept that? Why do we just think, okay, that's the way it is? Why isn't there a whole revolution happening with the way that the kind of people that they employ and the kind of vetting that goes on? Maybe this is what will kickstart it. But I just think that the fact that he ended up being revealed as exactly who we feared he was really disheartening. And I think the fact that Fox acted as swiftly as they did and dealt with it was probably a little bit more heartening. So, it's a vexed issue, but certainly a bit of a wild ride over the start of the weekend.
Yeah, no, I think that's all fair enough as well, Tom. And I guess, our thoughts go out to the people who were thrown into the middle of this bullshit through no fault of their own and had their own personal lives, I would imagine, turned upside down. And I'm not sure to what degree, of course, but that would have been really shit. And I can't honestly imagine. I can only sympathise. So,
yep, well said.
All right, Tom. We'll finish off the show as we always do with another round of Reverse Shine a Light. Okay, Tom, score check. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's going to be a long one, at least for me. I took Michael Frederick. He had 8 touches and a goal. Kicked a very nice soccer goal from the pocket. As you noted, is not mentioned very often by the commentators. Michael Frederick is very fast. So,
quick guy.
He's quick. Does that get him a point, though, do you think? 8 touches and a goal.
If we were handing out points based on how quick a player is, I think he would be right up there. I think you'd be looking at a point. But 8 touches and a goal, I think he's going to have a good year, to be honest. So I would expect a bit better than that from Fast Freddy. So, no. I went with Josh Battle.
Yes,
a bit of a on the outer favourite here, a bit of a regular in the reverse shine a light segment. We'll one day one of us will get him, Gus, but today will not be the day because
I'm also not sure we've ever actually scored a point off of Josh Battle either. I think we've just picked him like 6 times.
I don't actually have his stats, but I didn't even bother looking because I knew that he didn't do a lot.
No, he was not around very much. Well, let's pick our next player, Tom, for this week coming up.
Okay, well, I'm going to go with a player from the West Coast Eagles who I thought was pretty impressive last week, Jermaine Jones. He obviously, I think his second year at the Eagles, but it was a bit of a low-profile move. It might have even been the listed free agent type situation, from Geelong. So I know a few Geelong supporters are not all that surprised to see him playing well the other night, and were a little bit disappointed that he got let go by the Cats. But obviously with the issues West Coast have in their midfield, remains to be seen whether or who will come back this week. I think Kelly will, but potentially Yo, Shuey, still a few weeks away. So I think Jermaine Jones will get a bit of centre square time again this week against North Melbourne and could have back-to-back beauties.
Yeah, it's a pretty good one. He did look very dynamic coming out of the centre, and it'd be cool if he could. And with Willie Rioli suspended as well, there goes all those centre bounce attendances as well. I'm going to pick a Gold Coast son, one of the longer-serving warriors for the team, Sean Lemons. In honour of our producer. I don't really have a reason for getting a point, but now he's probably going to get like 30 touches. So Sean Lemons, I'm selecting from the Suns. They're playing Melbourne this week. So let's go Lemo. All right, Tom, is there anything else we wanted to touch on before we finish up the show?
No, Gus. We will obviously be back with our tipping show on Thursday, which we will record on Thursday. And it'll be a different day when we do that. And please, as I said before, check us out on YouTube if you haven't already. We're really, really flying on that platform, particularly in the Brisbane Lions and Fremantle departments. So if anyone knows why that's happening, please, on the otherone@gmail.com.
Let us know so we can do it for the rest of them.
Yeah. And if you're watching on YouTube and you like to listen to it on your way to work or while you're riding your bike around or while you're mopping your kitchen, we're on Spotify, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts.
All of the above.
Your usual spots. Yeah.
All right, thanks everyone. We'll catch you on Thursday for our, Instagram and YouTube tip show, and then we'll be back next week with another pod. See you later. Cheers.